proper, sensible agreement which take on board all the criticisms that have been made. You know the criticisms of the different groups here. I would like us to act in the interest of industry, workers, users and consumers, and to have a proper solution. And we have to take into account the existing acquis and not go beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bernd Lange is the next speaker, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. Well, I have 3 questions that I've submitted. The first is, why do we still not have transparency, even though Lisbon has been in effect since the 1st of December? And since February, we've been in an interinstitutional agreement with the Commission. So I can't really understand how the Council can sit around as an observer around the negotiating table, but does not send on the documents for acknowledgement by the Parliament. That's my first question. Also, we'd like to know who is negotiating this agreement. Is it not the case that in the WTO and the TRIPS agreement, only individual states were negotiating? We've heard that the USA were negotiating with individual states as a superpower. And it's quite clear that standards cannot be set then which will apply to all members, even though some of them were not round the negotiating table. On the question of substance, you have answered my question in the hearing regarding the question of acquis communautaire. You said that that was going to be stuck to. But when I look through the text, I have a few doubts. I can see that it's possible to create internet blockages where operators will be blocked willy-nilly for economic interests. That could have serious impact on science and research. We need a general supervision system, but I'm asking exactly where the European acquis is in that. In the case of compensation processes, we have to assess lost profit, but I don't think that's suitable to our policy. The third question I have is, how do you see the relationship between online and offline trade? You said that online and offline trade will be dealt with. Does this affect laptops and PDAs that go across a border? I'd like an answer to that question if possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Nicola Rinaldi.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. I think there's a question of original sin here in this debate, namely that secrecy, and that's the way the negotiations have been conducted up to now. And that's been exacerbated by the asymmetry. Now, if it's true that American industry has had access to some information on the basis of a confidentiality pact, as opposed to what's happened with the general public and the European institutions. And this is a problem that we've seen in other cases as well. We've discussed it in connection with the Korea Agreement. And now that the Lisbon Treaty has come into force, this kind of thing has to come to an end. These opaque negotiations have to come to an end. And I think this original sin is also the result of the fact that we're using the fight against counterfeiting to fight other battles, as if that were now a buzzword which allows anything to happen. Now, furthermore, of course, this is a sacrosanct battle for a trade power like the EU. I come from a city that you know well, Commissioner. It's Venice, in which there's always been counterfeiting. For example, Murano glass. There, the sanctions for counterfeiting were so severe that people could even be killed. So it's something that we have to take very seriously in a more and more global economy such as our own. Nevertheless, there are serious threats that are being provoked by this agreement. It's creating alarm in the general public, and the Commission has to be aware of that. Nevertheless, it is true that this issue, which is something that should be dealt with the International Trade Commission or the committee, but it should also be dealt with by the Civil Liberties Committee, because we're worried about issues of freedom of information, freedom of expression through the internet, the right to privacy, and possible criminal and civil sanctions for internet service providers. Now, there's a red line that should not be crossed, and I would like to ask the Commission to be very cautious here. Now, in more strictly trade terms, I'd like to ask the Commissioner for reassurance, namely that ACTA should not be used to fight against the trade for medicines that are accessible at a lower cost, safer, generic medicines that do not infringe copyright, but that are being produced by India and Brazil and that might be damaging, therefore, to Western companies.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Helmut Scholz. Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, Commissioner de Gucht, if you meet with 10 government representatives in a back room somewhere to agree a monitoring system that has headings like penalties and enforcing the law, border controls and the internet, then you can hardly be surprised that there are rumours doing the rounds and that citizens are asking for answers. I agree with those colleagues who've criticised you. This is a non-party political question from the Inter-Committee. This is something that goes beyond just intellectual property rights for engineers. This goes right to the heart of citizens' life. It goes to the creation of culture, and it goes into the heart of personal data as an issue. Articles 7 and 8 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, however, are something that we'll be reminding you of at regular intervals. Now, an agreement like this would affect the whole world, but emerging economies and civil society, the unions, and indeed parliaments, indeed the public at large, are not involved in the negotiations, even though it is them who you serve. We are getting brief two-page summaries of whole rounds of negotiations, and you are refusing to give us the same documents that you're making available to the member states. If you say that my concerns are unfounded, then prove it. Show us the negotiating documents. If you want one day to get this Parliament's agreement to a negotiated agreement, then you're going to have to learn this lesson. So I say to you, welcome to democracy. This Parliament wants to be part of this debate, and we're not going to let this go on any longer. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Syed Kamal for 2 minutes.
Chairman, and thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner. I think, Mr. Commissioner, you can see the strength of feeling across the Parliament, across all the parliamentary groups, where we are clearly calling, whatever our differences are on different aspects of ACTA and counter